Faith for the Busy Heart. And my name is Melinda Bush, and I am a game show addict. I love game shows. I don't even like late night TV, but I'll go on YouTube just to find those crazy, silly games that the hosts, make their guests do, and they look so silly or are, playing some wacky game. So I so enjoyed what we did just now. But I think game show love is in my DNA. My grandmother is here, and my mom would tell me growing up that she grew up watching Pyramid, The Price is Right, Family Feud, all those classic game shows. I remember growing up watching Wheel of Fortune, and we would watch that and we'd be like, Mom, you've got to get on that show. Mom, if you got on that show, we'd win a car. We'd be in Mexico by now. I mean, I'm like, this is the answer. Like, we'd have thousands of dollars. I loved it. So, of course, raising my kids, we watch game shows all the time. One of my favorites is Cutthroat Kitchen. Has anyone seen Cutthroat Kitchen? Anyone here a fan? Not a lot? Okay. So, Cutthroat Kitchen, it's a cooking show. I love cooking shows. And basically, each person starts with their winnings. Like, let's say if you win, you get $25,000, okay? So the game show begins, and they say, you can keep the $25,000, or you could spend it on a roadblock for your other contestants. So, they would bet on it, and whoever wins, let's say they bet $500, and they win this roadblock, and they give it to another contestant, and they give them, they can only use plastic utensils. Okay, so they had trying to cut tomatoes with plastic knives and cut steak. They're trying to open cans with plastic utensils. Every time the roadblocks are a little different, which makes it fun. Maybe they have to have one hand tied behind their back, or they have to cook on a little mini kitchen using only chopsticks. So much fun. But what makes this so exciting is that clicking, ticking clock in the background, right? I mean, it's like that epic moment where it's like, 5 minutes to go, and you watch them like, oh my gosh, and they're going around, and then the host is like, 1 minute, and the sweat is pouring down, and they're like, plate your stuff, it's just like, it gets me every single time. I mean, they're running and they drop the plate, and you're like, no. And I always thought, if I did a game show, I just want to be that person. I just want to be like, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, hands in the air. It's so much fun. So this, you can see I love game shows. But that clock makes it so exciting. Now, I'm sure it's not quite as exciting for the ones who are actually in the game show, because what's also unique is this clock makes these cooks suddenly forget everything that they once knew. It's like they all knew how to make cupcakes. I'm sure they've made thousands of them before, but they have 20 minutes and they can't make the simplest cupcake. I find it hilarious. It's like they lose their mind with this ticking clock, going on in their heads. The simplest of jobs seem impossible. So I very much relate to this, because I can't think of a season of my life where I can feel the most distracted and confused and forgetful than in seasons of intense busyness. Suddenly, I've forgotten where my keys are, I'm running out the door, and maybe even a kid was left inside the house. There's this forgetfulness that's often attached with being so busy and frazzled and hearing that clock constantly in our heads. So, as we talk about faith for the busy heart, I want to talk to us about this season that can often lead to confusion and forgetfulness. It's fun, and in a game, it's so silly and we're laughing, but in the game of life, forgetting God's promises are no joke and can often lead to destruction. Now, busyness in and of itself is not what's evil, right? But busyness often draws out who or what we're actually putting our faith in. When we have that knee-jerk reaction, where do we go? Do we put our faith in ourselves, or do we put our faith in God? So as we dive deeper into Abraham's life, we're going to see a man whose life got completely derailed. His timetables got flipped upside down, and instead of waiting on the Lord and trusting God, he decided to take things into his own hands, to compromise his faith and his convictions, and found himself in a very dangerous situation. See, God called Abraham out, right? That's how we left our last message, was God calling him out to leave his family, to leave his possessions of land and protection, and to go. It says in chapter 12, verse 2, just as a brief review, he said, "Go to the land that I will show you," right? Very vague. "And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing." Abraham obeys God, he follows him, and God takes him to the land of Canaan. He meets with Abraham in the land, and he says, "Look out as far as the eye can see. This is it. This is your promised land." And Abraham rejoices. He builds an altar. Now that you understand the history of those first 11 verses of God destroying and destroying and destroying and rebuilding and new beginnings, you would probably understand that there are no temples. He builds the altar. That's almost like his little mini sanctuary to remember that God met with him there. God gave him that promise. So he's worshiping God. He's building an altar, making his little church. The to-do lists are getting checked off. The perfect cup of coffee is on the counter. The kids are singing hymns in the back room. And your husband is happy at his job, and every second is a delight. This is where Abraham was, but it's not where he remained. And it often is not where our lives remain either, even if it's there for a second. In Genesis 12, verse 10, it says, "Now there was a famine in the land. So Abraham went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land." Roadblock number one, famine. Abraham was a good little boy. He obeyed God. He had faith. He followed him. This is it. Canaan. Okay, God's not so vague anymore. He showed me this is his promise. He built an altar and he worshiped, and then God brought famine? God brought famine to then bring him to Egypt? I want you to walk in Abraham's shoes. I want you to pack up your tent with Abraham. I want you to consider what thoughts he might be thinking at that time. But God, I don't have family. I don't have protection. I feel very exposed. God, have you forgotten your promise? Have you decided that I'm not good enough for it anymore? God, where are you sending me? There was disappointment and confusion, and all of a sudden, it wasn't just fun and games on a cooking show. It was real life. And Abraham was scared. And we see this in what happens next in Egypt. There was fear. I think sometimes in the Bible, it's hard to remember that these were real people who were actually traveling from Canaan to Egypt to feed their family. The temptation to think, God, have you forgotten me? I thought you brought me here to provide. So what happens next? Well, in Genesis verse 11, we see they get to Egypt, and this is what transpires. When he was about to enter Egypt, he says to his wife, Sarah, "I know that you are a woman beautiful in appearance, and when the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife,' and then they will kill me. But they will let you live. Say you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you." The next couple of verses, that's exactly what happens. They see her, she's beautiful. She says, "Oh yeah, I'm just the sister," and Pharaoh takes her to be one of his wives. And we skip down to verse 17. "But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. So Pharaoh called Abraham and said, 'What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so that I took her for my wife? So then here is your wife. Take her and go.' And Pharaoh gave men orders concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. See, this story, what happened in Abraham's life was a man driven by fear, which led to compromise. He's a man who had forgotten the promises of God. He heard the ticking clock in his head, and instead of trusting the Creator who has time in his hands, he decided, I think I'm going to take it from here. You didn't provide food for me in Canaan. Maybe you've forgotten me altogether. I'm going to have to protect myself. And he decided that blind faith in self and half-truths and manipulation were better than obeying God's promises. See, we read before in our last session, I think it's up here, it's going to be chapter 12, verse 3, God specifically told Abraham when he met with him, I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you, I will curse. God had promised protection over Abraham, but Abraham forgot. He was too busy and decided to take over for God. It was too easy to trust himself, and instead of going to the altar and worshiping, he decided to take matters in his own hands. But this is the exciting part. God did not forget Abraham. When Abraham forgot God, God did not forget Abraham. Point 1, trust in God. He will protect you. In the ESV Study Bible, it talks about this section, and it says, Abraham's selfish actions imply that he thinks God is unable to protect him. Yet, when the plan backfires, it is the Lord who rescues him. I love that. Every time when our plans backfire, it is the Lord who rescues us. See, watching Abraham in this story is like watching a good movie. There's like the promises at the beginning, like, oh, just stay here and you'll be good, and, I'll go protect you. And then the little kid runs off or whatever scenario, and you're screaming at the screen, like, no, don't go in that room. No, don't do that. You're only making things worse. I can imagine seeing this scene and saying, no, not Sarah. She has the offspring. She has the blessing. Like, don't do that. Trust God. Right? It's so easy when you're looking on the outside, when you know what the end result already is. It's so much harder when you're the one in the middle of it, because all you see are what you see. All you see is that, but he didn't provide for Abraham. There was no food in Canaan. Who is this God? Now you're in Egypt, you have no family, you stand up for yourself. She's kind of your sister, like if you go back like 5 generations, and half-sister once removed, it's true. But he wasn't trusting the promises that God had given him. I know in my own life, this particular message has been, so convicting. Putting on this event to talk about busy season. And I'm there sweeping the floors and getting anxious in my mind. I'm waking up early, and the first thing I want to do is jump into preparing this message. And I'm reminded of the actual message I'm speaking. Melinda, don't be a hypocrite. Put God first. Remember his promises. See, forgetting God's promises, it's not really something we do intentionally. I don't think anyone here has ever put it on their to-do list, forget God's promises. Right? We don't wake up like, I think I'm going to forget that one today. It's typically not how that works. Typically, forgetting happens when we've stopped remembering. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Narnia series, but there's a book called The Silver Chair. It's one of my kids' favorites. And Jill Pole is given very specific instructions by Aslan. He gives her, 5 instructions. And he says, remember the signs. He tells her over and over, remember the signs. Every night, remember the signs. And as trials hit, and as they're cold and they're confused and they start doubting, right? Again, it's the Israelites. It's been 30 years, God. She starts forgetting the signs, and they end up missing, like, what are the main signs? And And one of the characters, Puddleglum, is awesome. And he's like, Jill, have you been remembering the signs? Have you been saying them every night? And she's like, no, I don't know. Something about, this one word, go under or something. And he's like, no, you got to remember the signs. That's what we're looking at here in this busy season, in these busy lives. I find that the smallest compromises of putting God second, third, fourth, putting God back behind us while we get our agendas done can be so easily done and so destructive. I think that's the example that Abraham leaves us here. And that's why the excitement of the hope that God protected Abraham. He was true to his promises, just like in that Narnia book. Aslan comes back and he says, Jill, here were the signs. In the middle of the night when all seemed lost, he said, remember, this is what I told you. And she remembers, and of course, good wins, right? But what I want you to hear as we're thinking through these seasons where life can be so fast and can be so forgetful and confusing when we decide that we know better than God, the hope is that our faith is safe in his arms. Our faith is safe in his arms. See, this was a lie that Abraham was believing, that he wasn't safe. So he had to say lies and manipulate the situation so he could protect himself instead of putting his faith in God and trusting that God would be true to his promises. So the question is, where is your faith today? Where is your faith when everything seems to be falling apart? There are a couple scriptures I want to share with you, and I'd love for you to just jot them down. I find it's helpful sometimes to have scriptures even on like bathroom walls or in the kitchen or in the fridge or wherever you're going to be, to almost just hit you with that truth, right? To remind you so that they're not so easily forgotten. Here's one, Isaiah 41:10. So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you and uphold you with my righteous hand. The next one is Exodus 15:2, and this one came to mind. In our church, the little kids learned the song to this verse, and that song will just sing in my head, and just right at that right moment. The Lord is my strength and my song. He has become my salvation. And I love this. And the little kids sing it so strong. They're like, this is my God, and I will praise him. My Father's God, I will exalt him. This verse is particularly unique to the situation that we find ourselves in, because when they say, my Father's God, they're specifically talking about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. These are the Israelites saying, my father's God. They're saying Abraham's God. The God who promised Abraham that we would be blessed, that's my God. He blessed Abraham, so he blesses me so we can trust him even when life is crazy. Here are two more verses just to write down, just as sword and shield for your lives. Psalms 46, obviously, the one we've been meditating, kind of been the theme of this retreat. God is our refuge and strength and ever-present help in trouble. And the last one, 2 Thessalonians 3. But the Lord is faithful, and he will strengthen you and protect you from the evil one. See, these are the truths, like Jill Pohl, that we can wake up every morning and remind ourselves of. God never forgets his people. God always protects his people. And secondly, God is the only one who can save his people. This narrative shows us that God always and God only. God always protects his people. And God is the only one who can protect his people. While Abraham's wheels are twisting in his head of how I can make this right, while the lies are going in and the manipulation is coming, God doesn't forget. God is there in the midst of it. Despite Abraham's actions, despite Sarah's actions, God is faithful because of who he is, not because of who we are. Be still and know God protects his people. See, faith for the busy heart takes our eyes off of ourselves and puts our eyes on God. Faith says, though our intense situation seems confusing and we can't figure it out, we trust the one who holds time in his hands because he's the only one who can save. He's the only one. Abraham couldn't get himself out of that situation, and this is what God was speaking to the Israelites. You know, they were saying, how are we going to get to the promised land? When are we going to get there? And God was saying, remember Abraham? I saved him. I protected him. I guided him. I'm your God. This is my God, my father's God, Abraham's God, and our God. See, like the cooks in that show, it's so easy to forget when the clock is ticking and ticking and ticking. But what I want you to hear instead of that clock in your head is God always and God only. God always, God only. He will protect. He will come through. And I'm just going to get in the way. If I try to manipulate the situation, I will just be getting in his way. See, the moment that we break God's law, the moment that we think we can play God, we lose. We lose every time. The lineage of Christ was in danger twice. It didn't just do this once. Again, in chapter 20, we won't go there now, but almost the exact same thing happens. He fears for his life. He doesn't trust God. He says, Sarah, lie again. She does. And once again, the lineage of Christ is in danger. See, I think this is a warning that we can heed. I think we can trust that God always and God only, but let's not walk into danger. Let's beware of the warnings of trusting ourselves and not waiting on God. And point 2 is wait on God. He will protect you. Sometimes that clock in your head can tick the loudest, not when you're busy, but when you're sitting, waiting. When you're sitting around, waiting on a job, waiting on an opportunity, waiting on a relationship, unfulfilled desires, and there's a sitting and hearing time go by. Although you're sitting still, again, I would submit to you that there is busyness happening in your soul. As you are constantly asking, what do I do now, God? Where do I go? When are you going to provide? When? God, where are you? And slowly, these can be seasons where we can be tempted to compromise our faith. We can be tempted to take over for God and just make things happen. If he's not going to take care of me, then I'm going to do it myself. And that is such a dangerous place to be. It's such a dangerous place. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 4 through 6 talks about Sarah and her response to Abraham. Let this be an example to us of a woman who submits to the Lord. As Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, and you are her children, if you do good and do not fear anything that is frightening. I love that. Do not fear anything that is frightening. Do you catch the irony there? Don't fear this thing that's terrifying. Don't fear. It's terrifying. Let's make that clear. It's frightening. Don't fear. What a beautiful heritage. What a beautiful heritage we have in Sarah. See, she obeyed in danger. She feared God above man. And we can look at that example and strive to do the same. See, God protected her. He protected her. He always protects his people. Another verse that talks about waiting on the Lord, one of my very favorites, is in Exodus 14, verse 13 through 14. It was alluded to in the prayer at the end of the last session. Let me set the scene for you a little bit here. The Israelites have just been rescued, right? Millions of God's people, they're on their road trip. And Pharaoh says, never mind, I want you back. He's got chariots, he's got an army, and he is pursuing them. They go and there's nothing but water. Pharaoh's army, water, Israelites. I just can't even imagine being in that situation. Having children and thinking, what's going to happen to us? How many of us are they going to kill? Why don't we just stay in Egypt? It would have been better. And this is what God says to his people. When nothing makes sense, when danger is approaching, and Moses said to the people, fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians who you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You have only to be silent. You have only to be silent. All seemed lost, and God said, wait. Something we love to do as women. Just wait. My favorite thing to do. You know, I think it's interesting as women, it's interesting he says be silent, right? I feel like there's a bunch of different type of women, but for some of us, we can use our words to get things done, right? We can use our words. And God is saying, be silent. Wait on me. And I love this also. He will fight for you, right? I think some of us use our words, and some of us are like, we're fighters. We're like, okay, we're going to make this happen. What do I got to do? Just show me where to go, because I'm going to, we're women of action. It's so countercultural to say, wait, be silent and wait. Be silent and wait. Can there be any two harder things? At least for me. I don't know if I'm the only one, but I'm like, be silent and wait is no, that's not happening. And yet this is what God tells us to do. But this is what he says. He will fight for us. He will fight. He will make a way. So when I'm not being silent and I'm not waiting, am I believing that? Am I believing that he will fight for me? Am I like Jill Pole every morning refreshing my mind on these truths? Because forgetting is easy. Remembering takes work. It takes work. It's kind of funny, when I'm trying to train my kids and I'm warning them of something, they decide to do the opposite thing. They think in the end that's the better way. In the end, of course I'm going to protect them, right? In the end, I'm going to feed them right, or I'm going to protect them from the car that's driving by. The reason I want them to obey is because I know that's the best way for them. That's the easiest way. I promise you, it doesn't seem like it, but that's actually, you're going to get the food way quicker. You're going to feel way better. Okay, you can eat what you want, but your stomach's going to be in pain for days. That's how God is with us. These laws are not to restrict us. They're not because he's angry at us. He's not playing with us. He gives us these circumstances because he actually knows they're the best thing for us. And I think that's something that's also another lie that can often go in our heads is, this isn't what's best for me. Get me out of here now. I'm done. And it goes back to the garden. And it goes back to, I know what's best for my life. God, you don't. And they're dangerous lies. God's way is always the best way. He knows what's best for his children. My encouragement for you, there might be things that you're thinking of even now, even in the future, circumstances that you know you were not trusting God. You were manipulating the situation, or maybe you just weren't putting him first. This is where I want to encourage you. Not only does God provide the only way out, not only does he always protect his children, he uses those times in our lives as well. He uses those times where we feel like we screwed up, we failed, we were trusting in ourselves, and everything went wrong. And God saved me, but I just keep going back to it. God, help me. Help me to have faith in you and not in myself. Well, this is what I think is so cool. Abraham, he's kind of famous for trusting God and taking Isaac up to Mount Moriah and being willing to kill his own son when God said, sacrifice your child, your offspring, your one child that you finally got after waiting 100 years old, and you get your one child, go sacrifice him. Right? Everyone knows that story. He did it. Wow, incredible. And that is incredible, but I wonder if he was remembering those times in Egypt when he didn't trust God, when he decided that his way was the better way and lying and manipulating was the better course of action, but God protected him. God protected him. And I wonder if he didn't just hold on to that truth that even when I messed up, you cared for your offspring. How much more now? Hebrews 11:17 says, by faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered Isaac up. He considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. His faith had been so strengthened through trial, through messing up, and God saying, I still got you. I'm trustworthy. I'm faithful to my people. So as you hear that clock in your head, as maybe you think of times past, may it just grow your faith that God is a God of time. He will protect you. And bear with me here. There's this scene in Hook. Anyone seen Hook? Okay. Don't think of the context at all. But there's a scene in Hook right at the end. And there are all these clocks, right? Hook is Peter Pan. So Hook's little mustache is like with the clock as the second hand is going. And these clocks just bring fear to Hook, right? Because it reminds him of the crocodile who ate him, okay? Understandable. So he has Jack there, and there's these huge hammers. And as a child, I don't know why, I just love this scene. I know, kind of like when glass breaks. I don't know, am I the only one? That just kind of looks cool, and it seems interesting. So he has a hammer, and he's just smashing these clocks, okay? Just smashing and smashing and smashing these clocks. And I just thought of that scene. I thought, oh, if I could just take the clocks in each one of our heads and just start, just smash them. Just smash them. Our timelines, our clocks, what we thought should have done, what should have been sooner, what should have been longer, that's not God's timetable. And we don't need to be slaves to that ticking clock any longer. The God who holds time in his hands is not in a rush, and he is faithful. He can be trusted to hold you in his hands. You can trust him and wait on him. The busy heart puts faith in God and not in self, the lover and perfecter of our souls. He is worthy of your trust. So when God is taking too long, smash that clock. When you're tempted to compromise because things are not happening as they should, smash that clock. When fear sets in and when maybe you've taken on too much because you've got to be God. He's not doing it well enough, so I've got to take on all the responsibilities. Remember this truth: God always and God only. And the prayer that we want to close with, I'd really love the worship team to come up. We're just finishing up this session. But I believe there might be some here who, there are areas in their life where they just need wisdom. They're tempted to fear and maybe have knee-jerk reactions that wouldn't be trusting God. Maybe prayer for protection. Maybe you're in a situation that is dangerous. Maybe you need prayer for repentance where you have compromised your faith because you've wondered if you can really put faith in God or if you need to take over for him. See, Abraham had a God who could even raise his son from the dead, and we do too. We serve that same God who could raise Isaac from the dead, the same God who protected Sarah in Egypt, and we can trust him. So let's pray, and we'll end with some worship. God, I pray that you would just help us to trust you. I pray that even if there are areas where we're convicted that we know we haven't been trusting you, we haven't been putting you first, maybe we've forgotten your promises and we're quick to take over for you, God, help us to remember that you are a safe God. You protect your people. Even in fearful situations, we don't have to fear, though it might be terrifying, because our God is far more. He is far greater than anything that could ever bring us harm. And that you are with us, God. Thank you for this truth. And I pray that you would protect us in seasons of busyness, where we can so quickly get our eyes off of you and onto ourselves. God, help us draw our attention to you and help us to remember your promises. In Jesus' name, amen.